Okay, thank you all for coming and for your time today. We really appreciate it and appreciate all your involvement in this. Oops, and here's a welcome. And I have a few housekeeping items for today. We now have a project website that's up and running, and you can get to it from DLCD's homepage. So under the bottom left-hand corner of the homepage, there's a section called Current Topics, and it's listed right there, and you can just jump from there right to our project webpage. And all the meeting materials are posted there. We try to get them up there as far ahead as we can. We're hoping to do that a week ahead of time from now on. And the link will be there for each. So we're asking you to register for the meetings. And just so you know, you can register at the time you want to come to the meeting. So don't feel like if you need to be late, you can't come because of registration. The third thing is please start to keep track of any time that you spend on this project outside of the meetings. We're going to be asking you for that information at the cost of the project. Oh. Because we have such a large group, we're going to do introductions at each meeting, but to keep that manageable in terms of time, we have provided a list of members.
You haven't even tried audio from your computer, so that's not a problem.
We're looking for the echo problem.
And I'm just going to keep talking. And hopefully you'll be able to make some of this out. So to keep the introductions manageable in terms of time that it takes in the meeting, because we have such a big group, we are providing you with lists of members. And so folks who have already done a full introduction, your name, your affiliation, and your interest in the project, please just state your name and affiliation. And people attending for the first time, please also talk about your interest in the project while you're here. And we'd also appreciate it if you turn your camera on for the short time that you're introducing yourself so we can start to connect faces and names. So thank you for that. And we'll start on the introductions. I'm Marian Lahav. I'm the project manager for this project. I'm natural hazard mitigation planning coordinator with DLCD. And I have with me.
I'm Christine Shirley with DLCD, a climate change resilience coordinator.
And
Matt Kroll with the Department of Land Conservation Development Planning Services Division Manager.
And so now, if you wouldn't, I can't see everybody on the slide, so if you wouldn't mind just taking your turn. No, I'm not going to go down the list, but if you have been to the webpage, you have been able to download this document. You can do that now if you like. These are all in alphabetical order by first name, and since I can't see who all is here, we're just going to go around the room, go around the pictures. I see a few. Okay, I see Nancy Taylor.
I'm Nancy Taylor. I'm with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife.
And Carol.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Carol Trenga. I work with Oregon Health Authority in environmental public health as an epidemiologist, and I'm here to support the project's needs for health data and also learn more about other ways we might support the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Paul. Paul. Sclafani?
Oh, yeah, this is Paul Sclafani. I'm with the Corps of Engineers, and I'm in floodplain management and also work with the Silver Jackets Group in Oregon. So I'm just here to provide input regarding the levees, dams, and the infrastructure that the Corps manages.
Thank you. Mike Rupp?
Hi, I'm Michael Rupp, interested citizen and FEMA reservist.
Okay, Michael Martin?
Michael Martin, League of Oregon Cities, here on behalf of Ariel Nelson, who's lead on this, but this is important subject matter and to cities, and happy to participate. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Derek Wood?
Derek Wood, Klamath County Emergency Management. Just interested in learning more about the project and how it will affect our counties.
Which county are you with?
Klamath County.
Thank you. Jason Allen?
Hi, everybody. I'm Jason Allen. I'm with the Oregon State Historic Preservation Office, and I'm here to represent cultural resources in the state.
Thank you. Susan?
Hi, Susan Millhauser. I'm a natural hazards planner with DLCD focused on wildfire.
And Sadie?
Hi, everybody. Sadie Carney with the Department of Land Conservation and Development, and I work with our communications and community engagement. Happy to be here.
Amy?
Hi, everyone. My name's Amy. I'm a part of the Emergency Management and Community Resilience Program at Portland State University. So here just to learn more and also share with my cohort about any opportunities for them if interested.
Thank you. Erica?
Hi, I'm Erica Fleischman. I'm a director of the Oregon Climate Change Research Institute and a professor at Oregon State University.
Felicia?
Hello, Felicia Metal-Schultz. I'm the coastal hazard specialist with Oregon Sea Grant and OSU Extension Service.
Thank you. Okay. I've completely lost my place here. Tina?
Hi, Tina Nunez Osterink, City of Gresham. I am the city's natural resource and parks planner, and I work closely with our emergency manager on our natural hazard mitigation plan. So we have a work group with this plan with our last update, and we're the 4th largest city. So providing that input and being aligned with what the state's doing as well.
Thank you. Garrett?
Hi, everybody. My name is Garrett Gray. I'm a planner with the CT Clusie tribe in Coos Bay.
Thanks. Bill Burns?
Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Burns. I'm an engineering geologist with Dogami. We do a lot of hazard and risk assessments.
Thank you. Jessica Hamner?
Hi, my name is Jessica Hamner. I'm the Community Health and Family Services and Emergency Manager for the Coquille Indian Tribe.
Thank you. Dan Tripone?
Hi, I'm Dan. I'm with the Multnomah County Health Department. I'm the Climate and Health Program Specialist, and I'm working on our worst case scenario planning right now around climate hazards.
Okay. Wei?
I'm Hui Rodomsky. I'm the South Coast Regional Representative with DLCD.
Chris Sutton?
Wow, it's bad camera angle. I apologize for that. Chris Sutton, the Oregon State Fire Marshal. Our unit helps promote fire adapted communities within the state. Thanks.
Okay, Jenny Kleinmeyer?
Hi, everybody. Jenny Kleinmeyer from DCBS. I'm the Safety and Risk Coordinator as well as the COOP Coordinator, and here to see where or if we can be of help to your project.
Great. Tony?
Tony Janisek with the Oregon Water Resource Department, where I'm the state engineer for water resources and the dam safety program manager. Just here as the contact for the agency and looking to support in any way that we can.
Okay, Althea?
Hi, I'm Althea Rizzo. I work for the Oregon Department of Emergency Management, where I am the Geologic Hazards Program Coordinator, and I'm here to help out wherever I can. Thanks.
Thank you. Jay?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jay Wilson, the Resilience Coordinator with Clackamas County Disaster Management. We're in the throes of updating our county multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan. So this is a very pertinent topic to us. Thank you.
Great. Joseph?
Yeah, good afternoon. Joseph Murray. I'm a planner at the state's Office of Emergency Management.
And our partner in managing this project. And Claudia Rice?
I'm Claudia Reis. I am a postdoc scholar at Oregon State University, working on strategies of multi-risk reduction, and I am looking how we can collaborate for your project. Thank you.
Thank you. John Bauer?
Yes, John Bauer, a natural hazards consultant, and I'm here to want to see that the best natural hazards data are used to inform this update.
Great. Lauren?
Hi, Lauren Poor, Oregon Farm Bureau. We are the state's largest agricultural trade association. I apologize, I'm in my car, but there's no place to take a meeting in the Capitol building, and it's legislative session. So here I am.
Thank you. Sarah?
Hey everyone, I'm Sarah Pulse with Oregon Emergency Management. So just here to learn more about the process and support Joseph in anything he needs.
Deanna?
Hi, I'm Deanna Wright. I'm Oregon's National Flood Insurance Program Coordinator. I work at DLCD. I assist Oregon's 256 NFIP communities if they get stuck on floodplain permitting or floodplain management questions. And I'm here to support the DLCD team on all things floodplain and NFIP related. Thanks.
Eric? Eric?
I think there are a couple of Erics, so
Yeah,
I'll assume that
just seeing
it's
that.
me.
Okay.
Eric Rao. I'm a planner and utility infielder for the Oregon Office of the State Fire Marshal.
And Eric Main.
Hi there, I'm Eric Main. I'm the Environmental Justice Mapping Lead at the Oregon Health Authority.
Thank you. Sorry about that, guys. Judith Callens.
Hi there, everyone. Judith Callens, Oregon Department of Agriculture, here to learn and certainly contribute in any way that we can. And I find it very difficult to turn down anything that Chris Shirley asked me to do.
Lisa?
Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Gorsuch. I work for the Oregon Public Utility Commission in Safety, Reliability, and Security, and I'm a state lead for ESF2 Communications and ESF12 Energy for Electricity and Natural Gas. Certainly, with all of our critical infrastructure, we're always looking at resiliency and hardening of systems. So we're working in that realm and then wanting to learn about this project and support in any way I can. Thank you for including us.
Thank you. Christy?
Hi, I'm the National Fire Plan Coordinator for the Department of Forestry. I'm here to support the needs based on wildfire hazards.
Great. Ethan?
Hi, everyone. I'm Ethan Sherigan at the Population Research Center at Portland State University. Our interest, what we bring to the table related to population, housing, and census data for modeling or assessing vulnerability and resilience to a variety of natural hazards.
Thank you. Josh?
Hi, everyone. Josh Stevens with the Confederated Tribes of the Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Sayusa Indians. Work in the planning department here and happy to help however I can.
Thank you. Yes. Steve Pegram.
Hold on.
Okay.
Oh, I am off mute. I thought I was on mute. Okay, I'm Steve Pegram. I'm with the Office of Resilience and Emergency Management with the Oregon Department of Human Services.
Okay, thank you. I think that's everyone. Thank you all. Big group, and I'm really happy to see everybody here, and really grateful for your participation. So I'm going to move on here to our communications and engagement plan. And I just wanted to touch on this briefly. It's a fairly long document. Again, you can get it from the website. And there are just a few touch points for this group in the communications and engagement plan. One is to advise on a scoping survey that we'll be talking about a little bit later. Well, we can talk about it a little bit now. The purpose of the survey would be to make sure that we have the right people working with us in all the areas that we've laid out in the scope of work, particularly the lifeline areas and the areas that Oregon is putting forth as things that we want to include. So we'll talk about that just a little bit more later on. Also, for all of you to provide information in your areas of expertise as we roll along here. And another point of intersection is when we'll be asking local government and tribes who will be using the model that we will develop to test it and make sure that they can work with it, that they can get access, and that it works for them as well as for the state. That's one of our big goals, is to make this accessible for everybody. And then also we'll have a report that comes out with the product at the end of the work period, and we'll ask you for, and that report will be open to the public for comments. And so we'll ask your assistance probably with answering some of the public comments on that report. Those are the few points of connection between this group and our communications and engagement plan. Okay, moving on. We'd like to revisit the Declaration of Collaboration. This was the document that we provided last meeting, where we lay out what we'll be doing, who will be doing what, how the process will work, and then asked you to, I'm sorry, I'm flipping around here. I'll use the buttons instead of my roller mouse. And then asked you to think about with your agencies, how you would be able to contribute to this project and to sign, to work with us to negotiate that scope of work and then sign that negotiated agreement. And so we're looking for your response to this document now that you've had a little bit of time to review it and maybe talk about it in your agencies. So opening the floor. Co-hosting.
So you can unmute yourselves if you have any comments about the Declaration of Collaboration.
Here, I'm not sure.
Okay, nobody has anything to say about it. So so then we'll add that to the activities to prepare for the next meeting.
Right. So just as a refresher, this model is based on something that's used at Oregon Solutions to help articulate who's doing what and what their they're agreeing to do on the project so that we can keep track of what we expect.
Okay. All right, so then moving right along. We thought it was important that at the beginning of this process, we come to terms with definitions and how we're using our language to talk to one another so that we each know what we're saying when we're saying it. Yeah. Yeah, it's there. So we've noted there's a handout on definitions, again, it's on the website. And we've noted a number of them that we'd like to highlight today. Just these are the ones that we think are the most basic, and discuss them and see if there are any thoughts or other perspectives that we need to take into account here. We've kind of bowed to FEMA's definitions in this paper, and we've included a few others from other places where we didn't find good FEMA definitions.
Yep, and the reason for that is because we are doing this project under a FEMA contract. So we wanted to make sure that we are aligned with FEMA's definitions. So as you look through the definitions, we can expand on them, but we can't make them smaller. So please, if you have any comments about these definitions, you can let us know now or send us an email or put it in chat. You want us to go through them? Okay.
Yeah, just this.
Hey, this is Bill.
Mhm.
Can I make a comment? Vulnerability, it looks like you have 2 sub-bullets there. Or is it limited to those? Because when I think of things like, for example, a building can be vulnerable to hazards.
Yes.
So
Yes.
is it limited to those or not?
No, not
Oh.
limited to those, just highlighting those
Okay.
because they're new to everyone. Okay, so let's look at the definition for risk assessment. And I think there was a comment in the chat. Looks like I've missed a number of comments in the chat. Will we be expanding on how FEMA defines community lifelines as a formal term? Jay, I don't know if this is answering your question, and please speak up. In fact, we forgot to turn off the chat. We really don't want to use it. We want us to talk to one another. So don't wait necessarily to be called on. Just open your mic and speak when you want to say something. I want to make the distinction between community lifelines and the components or subcomponents of community lifelines. And what we have on our scope of work document from last time are really the components or subcomponents of community lifelines. And community lifelines are big, broad categories like food, water, shelter, all in one. That's one community lifeline. So, so we have identified those components or subcomponents of community lifelines that we feel like we can identify the vulnerability of and provide mitigation for. So does that get to your question, or if not, please expand.
Thanks, Marion. I just feel like we're wrangling enough with how this new term from FEMA gets evaluated, assessed, and applied in a number of different areas in our planning context. And so it seems like it's still kind of a work in progress of how that gets put into the mix for a risk assessment or how it's evaluated in terms of a grant application. And so when I saw lifelines and critical facilities listed here that are based on FEMA's definitions, and I wasn't here for the first meeting, so I just was asking for that clarification on whether or not you were, kind of embracing community lifelines, or it was something that was still a bit nebulous for for being formalized?
Well, it is a bit nebulous, as this is the first time that either local governments or state governments have been required to include vulnerability analyses on lifelines. And a lot of critical facilities and lifeline components are the same, if not similar. So yes, we're putting our best foot forward here and trying to do as much as we can to meet those requirements. And I think it'll be an evolving what FEMA wants us to do and how much we can do will be evolving over time. And so we're going to do the best we can here.
Yeah, this might be a subject in our scoping survey.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions before we go headfirst into the definitions? Okay. So I put the documents in here, and I thought at the time that I was able to make them bigger for you, but I'm not. Oh, maybe can I do this? Yeah, there we go. So we're going to start with, when we start with risk assessment, right? So that's actually a couple slides down. Here we go. Whoops. Here we go. Can you see that now? Risk assessment in a hazard mitigation plan is a product or process that collects information to determine the potential impacts of hazards to people, economy, built and natural environments for the purpose of informing priorities, developing or comparing courses of action, and informing decision making. Is that clear to people? Does it need some explanation?
Hey, Marion, this is Eric Rao. We just might observe that the purpose of doing that, I mean, you do say informed decision-making, developing, comparing courses of action, but it feels like the specific products that this ends up in, sometimes I feel like we have a hard time going from the very general data gathering and sort of data collection into the very specific, this plan needs to have a risk assessment. And I wonder if it's worth spending some time talking about what specifically this will end up in, or, I mean, even just that it will end up in both state and local documents potentially, or tribal government documents, depending on who uses it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this project is not developing a plan. This project is developing a tool. So what we're developing here is the risk assessment tool that we will use eventually in the state natural hazard mitigation plan, and that we hope the tribes and local governments will use in theirs. And so we are trying to create something that is scalable, that is flexible, that incorporates as much as we can of FEMA's requirements, the social vulnerability, the underserved communities, lifeline components, and yes, the project that we're working on now, the full tool, when it's completely finished, will probably not be available for use in the 2025 state natural hazards mitigation plan. But I think we'll be able to use what we're working on as we move along to enhance the state's 2025 NHMP. So does that answer your question or get at the clarification you were looking for?
It does. Yeah, that's a valid point. Thank you. And if I think of anything that I think is, if I come up with a specific example of what I'm thinking about that I think would contribute to the discussion, I'll provide it. But that's a great point, that the goal is to make a tool that could potentially fit in a number of specific plans or specific governmental actions. Yeah. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Okay. What's the next one of those? No, you don't have a copy of those. Okay, so
Hey,
we'll go back. Natural
before you-
hazard.
Before you go on,
Yeah.
we have a couple of questions, me, and then it looks like Erica has her hand up too. So about risk. You're talking a lot about the asset side. On the hazard side of a risk assessment, you know, what is really commonly used is the frequency and magnitude of the hazard, right, to analyze the risk to whatever asset you're looking at. And with many of these hazard data sets, we don't have that. We just have spatial locations and not how often it happens and how big or bad it's going to be when it happens. And so many times people consider that what they call at risk, which is not quite a full risk assessment. And so I guess I'm asking, what are you aiming for? Are you going to be inclusive or are you going to try to stick to the kind of proper definition of a risk assessment, which includes that frequency magnitude part on the hazard?
I didn't hear the last part of what you said. Are we going to stick to?
Oh, are you gonna do at risk and full risk, or so are you gonna do exposure as well as risk assessment, or just only consider hazards that you have frequency magnitude data with?
I think the answer to that is that we will consider all of the 11 hazards that are in the plan. And if we don't have magnitude information, we'll just have to figure out a way to address it qualitatively.
Great, that helps. It does, throw a little bit of a wrench into having one tool that can do both kinds. It's definitely doable, like we do it all the time at Dogami. I guess I'm just bringing it up as something that we need to look forward to and figure out how to overcome.
Okay,
thank you.
Erica?
Yeah, in the second definition of resilience especially, and also the definition of risk, I think the context that this is a natural hazard assessment that's focused on humans is clear, but I don't know if there's a way to make that more explicit, given that disturbances are not necessarily considered damage in a natural community. So if you're looking at natural risk, for example, damage or loss created by the interaction of natural hazards with natural resources, those types of disturbances are cyclic, or they're not. You can have damage or loss to humans, but it's not necessarily damage if you're looking at the world from the perspective of the natural resource itself.
Gotcha.
I don't know if that's relevant. And the same thing with resilience is that it's, recover doesn't necessarily have the same context in a natural system as it does in a human system. So I have no question about this whatsoever with respect to human systems, but just wonder if it's possible to avoid the implication that that what we would consider a natural hazard is problematic for natural systems.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, should we go on to natural hazard? Here we go. So okay. Natural hazards are sources of harm or difficulty created by meteorological, environmental, or geological events. Natural hazards such as flooding and earthquakes affect the built environment, including dams and levees. This is a FEMA definition. Any other perspectives, thoughts, understandings?
Marion, this is Jay, and this is a question for clarification on the inclusion of high-risk dams in our current mitigation planning update. There was some question with our University of Oregon rare participant about how we were listing high hazard dams, or how other jurisdictions are listing them as if they're hazards, or as if they're part of the flood hazard in terms of their capacity to produce a flood, but the dam itself is not, I wouldn't think, considered a hazard, even though they're a high hazard dam. I guess I'd like to know, since it's listed here, how's the state dealing with that?
Okay, what became clear to us in the 2020 state plan update was that high hazard potential dams need to be treated as a hazard in and of themselves. We have included it in our flood hazard chapter, but it has the exact same structure as any other hazard chapter. So it's got the full treatment. So really the hazard is dam failure. And the high hazard potential dams are those that have the potential of taking a life if they fail, even one. So, and those high hazard potential dams are the focus of a FEMA program where grants are made available for doing risk assessments of the dams themselves and repairs or demolishing them or whatever they decide needs to be done at that point. And they are re-examined or reclassified on an annual basis, and that report has just come out for this year, and it's not even quite done because FEMA hasn't given all the information that they need to actually finalize the report, and so it won't probably be done until May or maybe even June. But we can go on the information that we have now as part of the National Inventory of Dams, and the Department of Water Resources Dam Safety Program is very happy to help people with that information. So yes, it's a flooding question. You can put it in your flood hazard section, but I think you'll need to make sure that you meet all the FEMA requirements for high hazard potential dams. If you think that the jurisdiction is going to want some FEMA grant money for working on those dams. So
No,
yes,
thank you. That satisfies my answer. I didn't need more of a definition there. I just, since it was there, this helps me appreciate the way that it's been characterized. So thank you.
okay. Yeah, the only other thing I would like to add is that the dam doesn't necessarily have to be in your jurisdiction or owned by your jurisdiction to present the hazard to your jurisdiction, the dam failure hazard. So if there's, I don't know, if there's a dam that could endanger Estacada, but it's not in Estacada, that could still be part of Estacada's plan. So, okay, moving right along. Any other questions or comments on this natural hazards definition?
This is Eric Rao from OSFM, and I just wanted to say that with appreciation for the subtlety of the point that that Dr. Fleischman made earlier, that some people in the chat also appreciated, I'm just glad to see natural hazards here. I know it's probably old news for some folks, but it feels like in talking to FEMA, talking to some parts of FEMA, using natural hazards is still a little bit cutting edge, and I'm glad that we're doing that. It doesn't look like it's controversial here, and I appreciate that. Not using the term natural disasters is really what I'm about here. So thanks for that.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Very good. Yes, now I
Right.
understand. Yep.
A hazard happens and a disaster is when the hazard that's happening impacts people, property, or the environment.
Yeah, exactly. And I appreciate that you just went with this and didn't leave any wiggle room. So thanks.
Okay. All right. Going back again to the climate change. We're never going to get through this. Okay, how about, yeah, I didn't think it was going to take this long. Let's just start here. Are there any terms on this list that that you want to talk about today? Or do you want to just look at the definitions and come back with questions during the next 2 weeks by email or at the next meeting? We just want to make sure that we have a common understanding of what we're talking about. Anybody? Preferences?
Hi, this is Michael Rupp. I want to be sure we look at lifelines and understand the definition of that at some point. Doesn't have to be today, but I think it'd be worth exploring.
Okay, noted. Okay.
Okay, well, if that's the only one that folks want to look at today, we can do that one in the move on.
Yeah, can we just, there's the last one on their index. Can we take a look at that? Because it has it's pertinent to what I'm going to talk about in a few minutes.
Okay, so lifelines. Index. There's index.
Would be yeah. There's just a definition for index in there.
There is. I'm looking for lifelines. I can see it.
Oh, it's under
Okay, well,
lifelines.
oh, community lifelines. Okay, sorry. Here we go. Here's the definition. The most fundamental services in the community that, when stabilized, enable all other aspects of society to function. And one of the differences between lifelines and critical facilities is that lifelines are an integrated network. A critical facility is a one-off thing. It's a static thing. And some lifelines or lifeline components can be static things too, like a road or a bridge. But they're generally integrated into another network of assets and services. Index. Okay, and next we'll go to index. This page. There we go.
all right, so I just wanted to point out that when I say the word index, I'm referring to what it says here, a composite statistic that is generally unitless. So if that's not in the definition, but that's what I mean. And it's usually used to rank or put the results of your analysis in some sort of quadrant. So composite statistic that measures changes in a representative group of individual data points. So if you have a better definition, let me know.
Any questions about that one?
An example would probably help.
An example would probably help. I don't have one off the top of my head.
That's our next topic, right?
Or the National Risk Index. Yes, we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
But I just wanted to make it clear that the index is a composite statistic and it's unitless.
Okay. So
This is Tina from Gresham.
Mhm.
So can I just, looking at the definition of natural, the risk index, it says it affects the, it's not the after effects, it addresses the main natural hazard. So I think the definition could include that. So it's not the secondary or the results, but it's the main natural hazard. Does that make sense? Let's see.
Kind of.
Yeah, so it says, I'm reading from FEMA's website, it says the National Risk Index only considers main natural hazard events and not their results or their
Oh, yes,
after effects. Does that say that in there?
it does not.
But I think that's an important distinction.
Okay, so what are you looking at? Where are you looking at the FEMA definition?
I'll put it in the chat if you let me.
Thank you.
use it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, and then you can see.
Okay,
Okay. So the next topic is the introduction to the risk assessment. If you've had a chance to look at this, this is the one that we have in our current Oregon state plan. And it was a step forward in a number of ways, and it was also not complete in a number of ways. And what we'd like to do with this risk assessment project is fill in all of those gaps and make it what we wished it had been in 2020. I think I'll just spend a couple minutes on this so we can get on to another bigger topic. But there were a few steps forward that we made in the state plan. We recognized that there was no way in previous plans, there was no method for comparing different risks across the state. And the 2020 risk assessment does give us that ability. And we tried to quantify things and used a scoring system. And again, it wasn't perfect, but it was better than anything we've had before. And it also, for the first time, included a social vulnerability. But the best we were able to do was just include the CDC's social vulnerability index, just a whole hog, just we plopped it in and used it. And so, so it was better than we had done before, but it really wasn't good enough. And some of the other issues were that we did not include the total population exposed to each hazard. Using the CDC's single social vulnerability score for a county doesn't identify the nuances in socially vulnerable populations across a county. So it just makes the county look unified when it's really not. We used in this method only state buildings, state critical facilities, and local critical facilities, as well as the CDC index. So that was our physical and our social pieces of this. So it was limited. It wasn't as specific or inclusive as we'd like to be this next time. And we still have this issue of, I think, 4 hazards that probably won't have enough data to do anything quantifiable with. And hopefully we'll be able to at least to get some data for at least a couple of them. But if we can't, then we still have this issue of what can we quantify and what can't we quantify, and what do we do with the ones that we can't quantify.
what are those 4 hazards?
Drought, extreme heat, I think, windstorms, winter storms. Let me think. Drought, maybe volcanic hazards. Okay, so yeah, there were 4. Okay, and so that we gave you, it's like a lot of pages, maybe 100 pages of this risk assessment. This is the entire introduction to the risk assessment in the state plan, and it talks about lots of things. There are 10, 12, 15 pages on an introduction to climate change. There's a page or two on the social vulnerability. There's the whole analysis of the methodology that we used last time. So there's a lot in here for you to think about and consider. I'd recommend that you look particularly at what the methodology is for the risk assessment that we did last time. Okay, Steve, do you want to make your comment?
I put it in the chat. I just wanted to say that ODHS we also track air qualities because we're tasked by the legislature to provide cleaner air shelters.
Okay, thank you.
We consider that a hazard.
Yes, a number of local jurisdictions do also. We haven't included that as a discrete hazard in the state plan at this time. Eric?
Yeah, this sounds like a potential opportunity to use the Portland State University Build an Index tool. I'm just curious how, what Ethan thinks about that.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to weigh in on that. As I thought about that, as I was hearing about the CDC index usage, I can drop a URL in the chat where folks can take a look at. We've developed a tool which can be used to explore the CDC SVI, and right now it's in beta, so that's the only index that's up there. But eventually it'll include a variety of other social vulnerability index projects that have kind of been put out there by other states or local governments, as well as even other federal ones by other agencies. The key thing that you can do there is that we have replicated the methodology for calculating the SVI, and we will do that for the other indexes too, which means you can get it for other years or other geographic levels, which weren't published by the official tool. And also you can selectively include or exclude individual variables of interest. So say you like everything about the SVI, but you think it needs just this one other variable to be perfect, and you can include that and then recalculate it using the same methodology. Or you can adjust weights. So you like everything that's in the SVI, but you think, for example, that the percent limited English ought to be weighed twice as high for some particular purpose. And so you can adjust the weights on that particular variable and recompute the index and get that downloaded. So it sounds like that might be something useful as we get a little further along. We're planning to deploy that in this May or June maybe. And we can include as index projects develop, the goal is that we'll kind of hold a repository of index projects that were created by the users. And so this is something where maybe the members of the work group, develop proposals for indexes for specific purposes, and those could be generated from this tool.
That's great. We can't wait to see it.
Okay, so that's all I wanted to say about that. So famous new risk assessment requirements. You have this document, I think, from last time. Again, everything's on the website. Here's a little summary of what's different this time. We have had to identify the state's assets and determine what hazards they were exposed to and what hazards they're vulnerable to, but we haven't actually had to summarize which were the state's most vulnerable assets. So it's just a new piece. In the past, also, we've listed all the state buildings and critical facilities with their values that were part of a DAS data set, and which of those assets were exposed to which hazards, and then added up all the values and said this was our potential dollar loss. Now, according to the new regulations, not only do we do that, but we also have to summarize the potential impacts to the state assets from each of the identified hazards. So rather than saying that the Capitol building is worth this much money, and so that's a potential dollar loss, we need to say that the Capitol is subject to flooding, and the flooding is going to hit the first 3 floors, and the damage potential of the first 3 floors of the Capitol building is X. And we can also use as factors to affect that vulnerability the use and function of the asset. So that is also another broadening of this requirement. And then, of course, to include vulnerability of socially vulnerable populations, underserved communities, and community lifelines. And on the local side, we have done, the local jurisdictions generally once a year do a hazard vulnerability analysis. And we have in the past collected all their results from that and compared them to what our subject matter experts think. And in a lot of cases, there's quite a bit of daylight between them. In other cases, there's not. But that's not going to be sufficient anymore. This time, we need to identify the vulnerability of the jurisdictions in a way that includes probability in their vulnerability. Includes the impacts of climate change in the probability. And local jurisdictions have not yet, until now, been required to include climate change in their NHMPs or their risk assessments. And there are some jurisdictions who have done that, and we can look to that, but we don't have that for all jurisdictions at this point. So it seems to me that this requirement is maybe a little premature. The local governments also have to address vulnerability with respect to socially vulnerable populations, underserved communities, and community lifelines, but only those servicing jurisdictions that could affect state resilience. And we have to look at all the categories of lifelines for that. So the big message here is that we have a lot of information to glean from local jurisdictions' natural hazard mitigation plans to roll up into the state risk assessment. So I think that this is just another big body of work that's required this time that hasn't been required previously. Okay. And this is the document with the requirements in detail that I believe you have also or have access to. And now I'm going to turn it over to Chris to talk about the National Risk Index.
All right, so you may be wondering, or maybe not, why we are not just using FEMA's National Risk Index, which was published a couple of years ago and has been updated several times since. In fact, it was just updated in March last week. So I'm going to go, I have done a deep dive into the technical documentation, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how the index is calculated and some of the reasons why it may not be particularly useful to us. At one point, and this still may be true, we had thought about using the National Risk Index, excuse me, as a backstop for the 2025 plan if we could not complete our own risk assessment environment. But there may be reasons why we won't be able to do that. Anyway, I'll go over that. So I'm gonna,
yeah, I'll do it. Just
okay, so the risk equation that the National Risk Index uses is expected annual loss divided by what they're calling, or multiplied by what they're calling community risk factor. And that creates the index. So I'm going to go through what each of these parts are a little, just very briefly and very undetailed, just so we understand what's in that equation. So the expected annual loss, I'm going to go through the elements of that in a minute. The community risk factor is built from the CDC social vulnerability index divided by what's called the community resilience index, which is a product of the University of South Carolina. I have some concerns about that equation because it feels to me like they're canceling each other out. I have been assured by FEMA that that's not the case, but yet I've not seen anything published that demonstrates that. So if you have any insight into that, I would really appreciate it. Yeah, next. Okay, so there's that equation, expected loss equals annualized frequency of event, exposure, and historic loss ratio. So the annualized frequency is coming from the Sheldus database, which is now administered at the Arizona State University. And it's used as a source of data to calculate the number of events per year that happen for each of the 18 national risk index hazards. And by the way, the 11 hazards that we have in our risk assessment are covered in the national risk index. There's a little bit of definitions that are not quite matching, but for the most part, it's all there. So that's how they get the annualized frequency. It's of course a national database. So if it hasn't been picked up by Sheldus, it's going to be picked up in the national risk index. Next slide. So the next part is the no. Our internet seems to have crashed, is the exposure part. Is this the exposure? Yeah. So the exposure part of the equation is built environment. We seem to have a problem here, so
Reshare your
we're going to have to
screen.
reshare your screen.
Okay.
The population part of the equation comes from the 2020 census. And the agriculture part comes from the Federal Department of Agriculture agricultural census. And we're going to reshare our screen here in a second. Our internet seems to have crashed briefly.
Maybe we should check. Can anybody hear us? Are we still live?
Yeah.
Yes.
We can
Okay.
hear you. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. And all these exposures have been translated into dollar values, 2020 dollar values. And I'll note that on the population side of it, they've used a population equivalence value of $11 million for each fatality or each 10 injuries. So that's what's exposed in the National Risk Index. On the next one. And then they calculate what's called the historic loss ratio. Basically, they go back to that Sheldus database and they look at the dollar losses associated with the events and use that to calculate the percentage of loss for each of those building values, agricultural and population. It's kind of a complex calculation. I've super simplified it, but that gives the sort of the idea of where this information is coming from and how it's used. So we put all that stuff together. We go on to the next slide, and we get that expected annual loss, which is then multiplied by the community risk factor. So that is in a very brief nutshell how the index is put together. One of my issues with the technical documentation I did it in years of impressions. As well as doing that. Move on to the next slide. It's dead again. Okay.
It was. There we go.
Okay, so when the National Risk Index looks at buildings, they don't distinguish between state assets or private, it's all mixed up together. So we have no way to disaggregate that using the index. The most important thing is that it's retrospective. It doesn't, it doesn't address climate change except for sea level rise, which is a little weird, but it's mostly looking at historic losses, looking backwards. It doesn't include lifelines or infrastructure, which seems like a really big gap to me, particularly since FEMA has
Required us to do that.
for public assistance for these kinds of infrastructure projects, and we're required to do it in state plans. It doesn't disaggregate underserved, socially vulnerable populations or other kinds of populations that we might want to focus on when we're building mitigation strategies. For example, non-English speakers. And that pretty much is across the board. Everything is too aggregated to be able to develop targeted mitigation actions. And as was mentioned earlier in the chat, it does not address compound or cumulative effects, which is a problem. And I also know it does not include anything about the natural world.
And Jason Allen is asking from his historic preservation perspective.
Yes, and it does not include any historic or cultural resources. So for that reason, next slide, we are thinking that it's not going to be as useful a tool as we thought it would be. If we were to use it for the state plan, we would have to do a lot of work to bring it up to both FEMA standards and our own needs. We would have to separate out Oregon from the rest of the country and recalculate the relative risks. We'd have to expand the categories of exposure to at least include the lifelines, critical facilities, state-owned buildings, and natural systems, cultural resources, all that stuff not included. And then that would involve calculating historic loss ratios for those expanded exposure classes. Then we would have to model annualized frequency for climate change events to include climate change. We'd have to disaggregate some of the social parts of it. And there's probably a whole bunch of other stuff that we have to think about, which would be revealed in our scoping survey. So for that reason, we are not considering using the National Risk Index as a jumping off point for our upgraded state risk assessment. And we may not be able to use it even for our 2025 natural hazard mitigation plan update. So that's an extremely brief overview of the pretty technical details about the National Risk Index. I'm anxious to hear other people's thoughts about it, and yeah, Eric.
Sorry, just trying to unmute myself. I think that's a great idea, Chris. And I'm just wondering, is this going to require a subgroup to work on specifically?
To update the National Risk Index for Oregon's purposes?
Yeah, or whichever direction it ends up going, but yeah.
I think the first decision we have to make, and pretty soon, is whether we can make these changes in sufficient time to include them in the 2025 Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan update. Or should we just abandon the National Risk Index and just continue tweaking the process that we're already using for the 2025 plan and concentrate our efforts on the upgrade to the Oregon risk assessment?
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yep.
So that's a good reason for looking at the methodology that we used last time and what the problems with it were, what the good things about it were, and what its output looks like.
Right. And yes, Michael, I see your comment that the National Risk Index does not include any ecosystem, forests, fisheries, nothing. So that's a problem.
Well, and kind of in defense of FEMA on that.
Yeah.
Is that the CFR, the national code that FEMA's requirements are based on, also does not include the environment. It's only damages to people and property. It doesn't say anything about the environment, but our natural hazard mitigation plan, our state plan does. So yeah, that's one of the places that we want to go.
And I also want to respond to Jason Allen's comment about how it addresses assets that resist dollar valuation. It doesn't. And for example, when it values people only by death and injury, it doesn't address disruption of communities and the whole disruptive issue of rebuilding and finding your place again. And there are many disasters in which people do not lose their lives, or not very many people do, but it's hugely disruptive. Example being the wildfires we had here in Oregon in 2020. We didn't see a lot of loss of life, maybe 1 or 2 people, but the disruption was ginormous. That's not covered in the National Risk Index at all. So yeah, there are some huge gaps that we may not be able to overcome if we are to use it as a stopgap.
This is John Bauer. So for historical events, what about rarely occurring events, such as say tsunami? How is that factored in here?
It's not, because it's retrospective, it does not include Cascadia subduction zone earthquake or tsunamis, because we haven't had them. There is a little bit of discussion about how it addresses some of the lesser occurring hazards, but the ones that concern us in the state, it just doesn't address it all.
Eric, is that a leftover hand up, or did you have something else to say?
Leftover hand up, sorry.
Okay, no problem. Althea?
Yeah, so you said that this does not include Cascadia and any effects from it?
It does not, because we haven't had that event and it's looking backwards. So we would have to find a way to add that in as a future hazard, as we would have to do for climate change.
Okay, I just having a hard time grokking and doing this and not having Cascadia part of it.
Yeah, I agree. It's like planning for natural disasters and not including that is crazy. But if we were to use the National Risk Index, it does not include that at all. Jay?
Thanks. To follow up on Althea's point and disbelief, I guess I'm going back to the model that we've used for our risk assessment for the past 20 years that the state has provided, and it seems like it has a 100-year cutoff of whether you're looking back to see what's happened within 100 years. And so we've gone round and round on the rankings between 1 and 10 for things like Cascadia or Mount Hood that are in geological time many hundreds of years, but they're and so that's I guess I'm asking basically the same question. Does the national index, is it framed out like with that 100-year timeline? That's as far back as it goes, or
it's worse than that, because the historic loss record is very short for many of these events. So you can look in the technical documentation, but in most cases it doesn't really even go back past 1970. I mean, it's pretty short period of time where they're looking back.
Wow. So I would say also, this is a question that comes up a lot about the disparities between the Western states and the Central and East Coast states in terms of some of the program areas that they get annualized funding reinforcements for, like hurricanes and tornadoes that happen annually.
Yeah.
Where earthquakes aren't nearly as regular, so therefore there's there's not the disaster dollars recharging those programs on an annual basis.
That's very true, Jay. And one of my concerns about the National Risk Index is that FEMA's has said in their webinars that they want it used for grant applications for BRIC and other FEMA dollars. I think that can be problematic for Oregon and Western states in terms of being competitive for those grant dollars.
Thank you.
That's something. Okay, any other comments, questions, concerns, perspectives?
Yep, Claudia, you're right, exactly. Anyway, if you all hear or learn or wish to delve into the National Risk Index more and have more to share with me, please do, because we're going to have to address it somehow in our explanations to FEMA as to why we're not using this great new tool that they've spent a lot of energy on.
I understand that Oregon State University already had developed some studies on the characterization of earthquake and tsunami hazard for the Oregon State seaside. At that point, climate changes were not considered, but at this point, I believe that with the collaboration with people from the climate changes, it could be added to the simulation and to the probabilistic characterization of cascading earthquake and tsunami. And I am putting some focus on the Cascadian effects, because if we are talking about tsunami, we should also consider the cascading effects of having first the ground motions and then the hydraulic effects regarding the tsunami. So this is something that was done and could be repeated and contribute to enhance this risk management on the Oregon State.
Thank you.
Okay, now that we've been through a lot of material today, we wanted to revisit the Declaration of Collaboration and just see if you had any other thoughts on that, where your agencies or your work groups or your own expertise might come in, and if you just had any other thoughts about it from the beginning to the end of the meeting.
Have any of you shared it with your management?
Okay, then we'll just put that on for next time.
Well, what we'd like you to do is really take a look at that Declaration of Collaboration front matter, and then the point is that each agency or entity that is contributing to the risk assessment will articulate in a separate page what they're committing to do, and that will be signed, and it will become a, for lack of a better word, a contract, informal contract between us and your agency, so that we understand who has the ability to do what, and therefore can figure out whether we need to negotiate more, find other resources, whatever we have to do to pull the project off, to complete the project.
Althea?
Yeah, could you expand on that or provide some templates or some ideas of what you want from us? Because there's a lot of things that we could be doing, but we need to know what you need from us.
Yes. Oh, that's a fair point. I think the scoping survey will help with that. I guess for right now, the important thing is to share the concept with your management and the idea that you'll be asked to commit some resources. But yeah, that's a fair point that we should provide a little more guidance about what we need from the various agencies. And if you want to see a declaration of collaboration in the wild, go to the Oregon Solutions website. They have all of them that they've signed there, and you can see how they've been crafted.
Okay, so that brings us to this. So in addition now to the Declaration of Collaboration, which we could add to this slide, we'd like you to spend some time thinking about FEMA's new requirements and how you could, how your agency could coordinate with us or help us meet our goals with respect to FEMA's requirements. So like we've said before, we want to meet FEMA's requirements, but then we also want to move beyond FEMA's requirements and do more. So given the scope that we put in front of you last time and the information that you have now, I think we've repeated the FEMA's new requirements on both meeting lists of documents, so you could get it in either place. Just think about, read through them, see what FEMA's requiring, what you think it means, and how you could connect to that. And for the scoping survey, although we have a really large group here, we also have some gaps, and we want to make sure of two things. One, that we're answering the right questions, that there aren't other issues that other people would think of that we wouldn't think of. And also the gaps we have are in people to contact about vulnerabilities to infrastructure, critical facilities, lifeline components, and the other things that are listed under the Oregon initiatives on the scope of work document. So those are the focus areas for the survey. And if you could just look at the scope of work document again, look at FEMA's requirements, and then jot down some thoughts about questions that we might ask or topics we might cover. And you wrote one down earlier in the meeting. I can't remember what it was now. And then if you could also share any contacts you have in those areas or your email lists, just in general, so that we could use them for this survey, that would be very helpful. And the email for us is that dlcd.nhmp@dlcd.oregon.gov. That's our group email list for the group of us here, that myself, Chris, and Ashley, so that all of the emails for this project don't clog up our email boxes. So if you would start using that email to send us your comments and questions as well, and use it to send us your contacts for the survey and your suggested questions, that'd be great. Any questions or comments or thoughts about that? Okay, is there anybody here who was not, oh, Susan, go ahead.
Hi, unmuting. Marion, I'm wondering, since you're ahead in the agenda, do we have time to go back and talk for a few minutes about community lifelines, since that was raised as one of the definitions?
Sure.
And that would help me personally in my work as well, but more broadly, since that was brought up and we do have some time.
Okay, sure.
Thanks.
Okay. What is the?
And you had that illustration. Did we not post that illustration?
No, we didn't.
Okay.
Oh, it's on the first page, right? Okay. There we go. Can you see that okay?
So Susan, what are some of your thoughts about the subject of community lifelines?
Yeah, I'm not sure who had asked about that earlier to discuss it. But I think it's understanding I'm still trying to figure out, and I'm new to working on the NHM piece, but the intersection between the community lifelines, overlap with critical infrastructure, which is, communities and the state more clearly have been able to identify, and then looking at the vulnerability or risk assessment, at those things. I mean, are we thinking more about systems? So like fuel supply, for example, versus, impact to every gas station in Oregon, or I guess, just trying to get an understanding of kind of scale and what you guys think about that. That's just one example that popped into my head, but.
Well, I think one of the things you said, that community lifelines is more about networks than critical facilities as a single thing. It also includes services. It does include things like fuel. What is a critical facility to one community is not necessarily a critical facility to another. There's one community we worked with that considered every 7-Eleven in their area as a small rural town, and they considered every 7-Eleven a critical facility to get food in an emergency. But not every community has that concern or considers it such. The lifeline services are things like sheltering, government services. I'm trying to think of all the different ones. I could bring it up online, but there's shelter, there's food, there's water, and these aren't necessarily just, how am I going to keep my water treatment system from being affected in, say, a flood, but also how am I going to get water to my community after an event, that sort of thing. Go ahead, Bill.
Oh, I just typed into the chat there something, lifelines, and I said lifelines can be quite complex and therefore very difficult to evaluate risk on. And many are owned and operated by entities that do their own risk analysis. So a great example would be, the Water Bureau for the city of Portland and Bull Run. And they do a very, complete risk analysis with regards to natural hazards. So, my point is maybe in some of these cases, we point to these other analysis that are already done, or don't try to do it ourselves.
That's an interesting thought.
Yeah, another lifeline would be, of course, roads, and ODOT's done lots of work in local jurisdictions on evacuation routes and that kind of thing. So no sense doing it over.
I can chime in there. OEM's working on lifelines right now, and so we're doing a lot of that work as we speak.
Hey.
So Sarah, can you talk a little bit more about what you're actually doing?
Well, like baby steps first. So like our first thing is we're going through like crosswalking what we have for current emergency support functions and what that looks like to convert it to lifelines, and identifying like the essential elements of information in those within those subsets of the lifelines, because we do want to move to using that. So then our plans will also be on that same lifeline system as opposed to what we currently have for our EOP through the ESF breakout. So that's currently happening. So this might be really timely. So we might be doing a lot of that crosswalking that would be helpful in regards to like definitions and like that essential element part. I'm pretty new to lifelines myself, so it's a big learning curve for us, but we just started doing that.
So Jenny, yes, we are talking about the lifelines that you've put in the chat. But what we're really focusing on are the components or subcomponents of those lifelines that we can actually discuss mitigation about.
Yeah, we can't do everything on that big chart. And Jay.
Thanks. I'm glad we're wading into this a little deeper. I guess that it's one of those things where you're asked to provide some aspect of these kind of definitions that FEMA's laid out in nationally competitive grant applications, but yet there's not a very clear way for us to evaluate or to understand how you're being evaluated for them. And so for the mitigation planning, some of this could be quantitative, some of it can be qualitative. When I think back on the Oregon Resilience Plan, we had these sectors that we called them for things like water, wastewater, the built environment, buildings, the utilities, and then National Institute of Standard and Technology a couple of years later put out their Community Resilience Planning Guide that was largely based on the ORP and expanded those sectors a little bit. And so when I see FEMA's just kind of characterization of community lifelines, it seems like it blends the built environment like water, wastewater with service delivery, which is tied to that infrastructure, but is also kind of considered separately. And so again, I'm probably only echoing some of the questions or curiosities that we have in being told to use this and work with it, but without a very clear understanding of both how we define it or implement it or how we're evaluated on it at this particular juncture. And whether that's a requirement now, or do we need to follow the state, because you're not going to have this implemented into your state plan until 2025. Sometimes there's a number of these kind of initiatives that come out, but the cart's kind of before the horse in terms of how the expectation that local communities are supposed to like land and hit this, hit the ground running on working on it before you have a clear expectation of what it is.
Right. And so maybe that gives us some opportunity to define it and to say what we can do and to make some progress where we can. And, that becomes a discussion with FEMA. Because you're right, they're asking us to hit the ground running with very little clear expectation. So Susan, are we getting at your questions?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, there was, some other folks who also had questions. So I think that's great. Just kind of digging into it a little bit. It's helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Clearly an area we have to talk about and define more.
Right.
And put some borders on for our analysis.
Right. And the definition of critical facilities right at the bottom here. It says critical facilities are structures that the state determines must continue to operate before, during, and after an emergency or hazard event and or are vital to health and safety. So that gives us lots of room to define what critical facilities are for us. We have done that in the last two plans, and some of them overlap with the components of community lifelines. So, and we may want to do that again. Yes, Sadie, go ahead. We can talk about the scoping survey.
Thank you. I'm trying to turn on my camera. It's not. Wow. There we go. I'm a big survey fan, so I'm hoping to be of any assistance to this group if I can be in that regard. But I heard you talk about it at the beginning, and then I've been trying to answer some emails from Kirsten, who's our deputy director, for those that don't know, at DLCD. And so I may have missed it if you went into it a little bit more comprehensively, but I would love to understand what's involved so that I can figure out how I can help.
Okay. Well, again, let's see. Gotta get out of this somehow. There we go. Okay, I'll just run down here to the end. The survey would be one way of making sure that the public has some input into the scope of this, and making sure that we've got the right elements, you know, and input at the front end instead of only at the back end. And also we're looking for information. One of the gaps we have are people in our group who own or operate infrastructure, critical facilities, lifeline components, and the other things we have listed under our Oregon initiatives on our scope of work document. So we're looking for information about that too. And so
basically it's what do people want and what do we have? And yeah.
And what don't we have and how to get it.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've asked folks to look at FEMA's requirements and think about the pieces, and if we've got the right pieces or all the pieces, and who we could contact for these particular things, and write down some questions or names and send them to us at that email address, and also for them to share their email lists or contacts with respect to those things so that we can use them for the survey.
Thank you. And so if I'm understanding, I mean, the lifelines is just huge, right? And I've looked at that and sort of let my mind boggle over FEMA's definition of what all is included. But for our purposes, it is folks like, I'm not sure if we have ODOT on the call. I kind of imagine so. Apologies if I missed you in the lineup and you said you were from ODOT. We don't have affiliations with the names, but that would be somebody who could put us in touch with, I mean, ODOT's an infrastructure owner, but then there's more like freight corridors and county roads and stuff like that that would be critical service delivery in like the time of an emergency. And then critical facilities, if I'm kind of guessing right, it would be both communication and water in addition to transportation. And maybe if I read the FEMA thing, like food access, it's really broad, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a big list. I don't it'll be interesting to see how much we get back from the group, and then how we can kind of capture, like design questions that capture appropriate and kind of actionable in terms of your risk assessment data from each of those groups. What is your timing on the survey?
Very soon.
Okay. So if folks are going to share
their ideas about sort of different infrastructure, critical facilities, lifeline components with you so that we're considering them within the sample group. But then also how we turn information from these different people that we sample into actions. They should do it by when? By the next meeting?
Yes,
That would be most helpful.
that would be great.
And also, if they could also, if people on the call can also send us questions they have where they want the risk assessment to address something that maybe we haven't in the past, or they want us to improve a part of the risk assessment that was maybe didn't quite meet their needs last time.
So, yeah, there is some homework. And all the documents again are on our website that you can find under current topics on DLCD's homepage. And we're planning the next meeting for the week of April 10th. So you have doodle polls for that week and for the week of April, I think it's 24th, the 2 weeks after that. And so please fill those out by tonight so that we can get those on our calendars. And then I think we have all the materials that you need at this point. If you want something else, let us know. We think we're missing something. We've got a little more than 10 minutes left. Is there anything else anybody would like to discuss? Well, okay then. We're adjourned. You get almost 15 minutes back.
Yeah, to look at all those documents that we want you to look at.
Right. Oh, I'm sorry. Is there any community comment? Or anybody who wants to speak about something that hasn't had an opportunity yet? Okay, then we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That would be understood.